Polling has proven that Ukraine is ready to capitulate because reporting by Russia's defense ministry TV channel Zvezda never lies, and Ukraine violated the Budapest Memorandum. Welcome to StopFake, the place where we've been breaking down Russian disinformation about Ukraine for 5 years now. So let's get to it. Polling and surveys are often abused by disinformation specialists as political manipulation instruments. For example, there's a program on Russian TV Channel 1 called Time Will Tell, and it's hosted by Artem Sheinin. One of the show's topics was ostensibly looking at the challenge faced by Ukrainian President Zelensky, who finds himself between Putin and Trump, as they said. In this context, the program relies on polling to offer a solution for President Zelensky moving forward after the Normandy 4 summit held in Paris, where the presidents of Ukraine, France, Germany, and Russia met to begin negotiating a political solution to the war. But the program presents fake polling results of a real case study in Ukraine, saying that 72.5% of Ukrainians agreed to compromises for peace. At the same time, the real results of the latest research conducted by the Ilko Kucherev Democratic Initiatives Foundation together with the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology paint a different picture. According to this survey, only 14% of Ukrainians believe making any compromises for the sake of peace is worth the result. Another 58.5% believe that for the sake of peace it is worth making some compromises, but not all. Essentially, the survey is trying to identify the point at which compromise turns into capitulation. The host of the show, Artem Sheinin, asks the question, do you think it is necessary for the world to compromise with Russia and the leaders of the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Luhansk republics? 72.5% answer yes. But the reality is more nuanced than Sheinin would like the audience to believe. Again, 58% of those surveyed believe that some compromises, and not all compromises, should be made to establish peace. 24% of people living in the south and 18% living in the east of Ukraine are more inclined to support any kind of compromise, while only 10% of people living in central Ukraine and only 13% in western Ukraine agree with any kind of compromise. In fact, the poll also showed that 29% of people living in western Ukraine and 20% living in central Ukraine think that peace in the Donbas region can only be established from a position of strength. The takeaway from the survey is that most Ukrainians think that some compromises should be made, but do not think Ukraine should give in to all demands or throw in the towel. There is a difference between blanket support for compromise and compromise on X, but not Y, in exchange for something, in this case peace. And large support for peace does not necessarily correlate with large support for compromise. Not many people are against peace. I mean, if a survey were to ask, do you support everything good and are you against everything bad, the results would probably be 100%. But that's probably not something upon which you'd want to build your domestic or foreign policy. Remember, correlation is not causation, and spurious correlations are weapons in the hands of Russian disinformation agents. Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. The invasion started when Russian military men seized Ukrainian bases and administrative buildings on Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. International legal speak calls it an illegal annexation. Russia expanded their military operation and invaded Ukraine's eastern regions, Donetsk and Luhansk. At first, the scenario was to create a state called Novorossiya, but that was eventually abandoned and replaced with People's Republics. Now, Russian disinformation was and remains a large part of that invasion. They managed to build up a wide network of various channels to transmit information from social networks to large state-owned media conglomerates. One of the main propaganda and disinformation platforms is Zvezda, the media holding of the Russian Defense Ministry. StopFake has built an archive and database reporting from March 2014 through to June 2017, and the largest number of fakes was generated by the Zvezda media holding. The website Ukraina.ru and its parent company, the RIA Novosti news agency, are not that far behind. The study showed that Russian propaganda is purposefully distributed by both Russian state agencies and private media companies. In addition to manipulations and fakes, propaganda media actively use hostile rhetoric. For example, terms like armed coup, Kiev regime, junta, punitive, punishers, and they're used to deliberately create this image that Ukraine is an enemy and a danger to the world. Zvezda also regularly pushes fakes about hungry Ukrainians, that Ukrainians, for example, are stealing bread from pigeons, or Ukrainian servicemen are stealing cattle from civilians in Ukraine's territories occupied by Russia. And their favorite fake they push is about language. For example, that Ukraine declared war on the Russian language, or that a person's mouth was mutilated for speaking Russian. Now, the goal of propagandists is not only to distort reality, but also to create certain myths and ideas about Ukraine that eventually become stereotypes. Based on an analysis of 500 examples of fake materials from Russian media, StopFake co-founder Eugene Fedchenko identified 18 Kremlin strategic narratives. The top 5 are: 1. The illegal seizure of power in Ukraine resulting from overthrowing the legally elected leadership or a coup d'etat. 2. Ukraine is a fascist state. 3. Ukraine is a failed state. 4. Russia did not invade Ukraine or attack Ukraine militarily. And 5. Discrediting the Ukrainian armed forces. The complete list of the Kremlin's disinformation narratives is available on our website, StopFake.org, as well as a top 10 of the most ridiculous and high-profile fake stories published by Zvezda since 2014. Finally, one of the most bizarre pieces of Russian disinformation is about the Budapest Memorandum. Remember, the Budapest Memorandum was signed by, among others, Ukraine, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Russian Federation back on December the 5th, 1994. At that time, Ukraine was the third largest nuclear power after Russia and the United States. In exchange for Ukraine signing on to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the Budapest Memorandum included security guarantees against threats or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of Ukraine. This year, 2019, marks the 25th anniversary of the memorandum. But this year, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov claims that Ukraine violated the Budapest Memorandum. Violating the Budapest Memorandum would mean that Ukraine somehow acquired nuclear weapons. But there's nothing to suggest that at all. Lavrov claims that Russia has kept to the terms of the memorandum because Russia has, quote, never used or threatened Ukraine with nuclear weapons, so no violation of the Budapest Memorandum occurred. But here we are in 2019, and Russia has occupied Crimea and Ukraine's eastern territories of Donetsk and Luhansk. Okay, what is Lavrov talking about? Well, there are 6 points to the Budapest Memorandum, and I'm not going to go through all of them. But the second article says, the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America reaffirm their obligation to refrain from the threat or the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of Ukraine, and that none of their weapons will ever be used against Ukraine except in self-defense or otherwise in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. Clearly, Ukraine did not attack Russia, so for Lavrov to argue that invasion is self-defense would be ridiculous. But this is Russia, so hold on. The fifth article says, the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America reaffirm, in the case of Ukraine, their commitment not to use nuclear weapons against any non-nuclear weapon state party to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, except in the case of an attack on themselves, their territories or dependent territories, their armed forces, or their allies by such a state in association or alliance with a nuclear weapon state. So, because Russia didn't use its nukes against Ukraine, Russia didn't violate the Budapest Memorandum. Stellar reasoning by Lavrov. I mean, how delusional do you have to be to think that this makes sense? Although Putin has already admitted that Russia invaded and occupied Crimea, that doesn't stop Lavrov from cutting his jumpy cord as he goes off the cliff and says, quote, we continue to respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine within the borders that have developed after the referendum in Crimea and after the reunification of Crimea with the Russian Federation. It's like the sun rises in the west and sets in the east in Russia. But still, how has Ukraine violated the Budapest Memorandum? Well, according to Lavrov, after the Maidan Revolution, Ukraine continues to encourage racist, neo-Nazi, xenophobic tendencies. So, Ukraine is such a hotbed of Nazism and fascism that it managed to elect a Jewish president, President Zelensky. Look, none of this makes any sense, and you can be sure of only one thing. When Lavrov's lips are moving, he's lying. That's it for this week. You can find much more dissected disinformation on our website, StopFake.org. Be vigilant, look out for fakes, and remember, if you spot any disinformation about Ukraine, forward it to us for a truth autopsy. From all of us at StopFake, Happy New Year. I'm Marko Suprun, and this is StopFake. Thanks for watching.